Okay, we're going to get the meeting started. My name's Sean Seaman. I'll be helping facilitate tonight, but we're going to hand the mic over to our board president, Randy Smith, and he'll get the meeting started.
So I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's great to see a good turnout, so we have a lot of information to provide. And for looking at the crowd, if there's any of you that are baseball fans, we probably could keep you apprised of the opening round of the World Series. We know that we're interrupting that tonight and do apologize, but it is what it is. My fellow commissioners that are here, and I think Commissioner Congdon will be here in a little bit, but Steve McKenna from Leavenworth and Dennis Bowles from Wenatchee, and I'm from Cashmere. And I think most of you probably know Commissioner Congdon. And we hope that you find this evening's meeting informational. We've put a lot of work. I know our staff has put a lot of work into the presentation and all of the facts and figures and listening that was gone on over the last couple of years, and we thank you for your engagement. Now, if you would all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And with that, I will turn the microphone over to Sean Seaman.
Thank you, Commissioner. So we'll get started here in a second. Just a couple of items for a reminder. Again, cell phones, please. We can all keep those vibrators silent. We are videotaping this tonight. Main reason for that is to capture all the comments. So it'll be important for you when you are providing comments that we use a mic. And then we'll ask you to provide your name and your address as well for the record. There are more materials in the back. If you've come in and didn't get to them, the agendas and some of the handouts are in the back of the table to my left over there. And as well as if you didn't get a chance to sign in and want to make comments, please do sign in, provide your email. And if you'd like to make comments, noted on that. We'll be using that list. Doesn't mean you won't have a chance to give comments if you didn't get to, but it makes it easier for us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenna for a little bit of a safety background minute, and then we will continue with the presentations.
Good evening. Just a quick overview, since we're in a different building than usual commission meetings. If there is an emergency for whatever reason, please exit out these doors over here. You can go either to the left or the right to the stairwells. Please do not use the elevator. We're really close to emergency help if anything happens, so that's great. And then the restrooms are out these doors to the left, and then take another left, and they're back in the corner back there. Thanks.
And with that, Steve Wright, our General Manager, will start the presentations.
Thank you, Sean. For those of you here, it's 1-to-1 on the top of the fourth. We'll keep you updated during the course of the evening. So thank you all for coming here. It's great to have you. We have been at this process for a really long time. I'm going to do the accelerated history, the 1 minute and 30-second version of the last 2 years. So we've done a lot of work to engage folks in terms of thinking through this whole question of a substation. We've had more than 20 public meetings where there's been an opportunity for the public to engage and to comment. We've had a focus group that was made up of folks from here in the community that participated with us for the last couple of years. With the focus group put together selection criteria that helped to guide us in terms of thinking through what options do we have in terms of where we would place the substation. We looked at 18 different sites during the course of that time. We evaluated areas then after looking at the original area around what's called the load center, which is the middle of where the load growth is occurring. We looked at locations away from the load center to try to figure out if that would work, and concluded that that would lead to a lot more transmission and distribution lines, and we certainly learned about the impact on views of the lake and the concerns about that. So we backed up from there and came back to areas around the load center. We evaluated undergrounding, because that was an issue that folks were thinking about. What are our options in terms of undergrounding, both distribution and transmission? There are some options in terms of undergrounding for distribution. The costs and reliability impacts of undergrounding of transmission look too daunting for us, and so we said undergrounding of transmission not likely to occur with respect to this project. We went out and sought willing property sellers because we didn't want to use condemnation, if at all possible. So we went out and looked around to see who might be willing to offer us a property for sale. We identified and took options on 2 properties, the ones we'll be discussing tonight, the Hellier property and the Henderson property. And at the end of all that, I would just say this is, in terms of siting a substation, the most Chelan PUD has ever done in terms of going through a process like this, the most transparency. And maybe a bit surprisingly to folks, this will end up being the highest cost substation that we've ever built as well. This is a difficult substation to put in place. So what do we know as a result of all of that effort? So we've learned a few things that are really important. We've learned that, first of all, there is definitely a need for a substation. We've continued to see load growth here. We saw this past winter, the existing substations in this area are loaded very heavily to the point where it's clear that action is needed in order to maintain reliability for this community. And we know that there is a lot of growth that's occurred here since 1981, when the last substation was built. And every kilowatt hour of additional usage that's occurred since 1991 contributes to the need that we have today. So it doesn't really matter whether it's a new house or a new television or a new computer. Each additional kilowatt hour of usage is contributing to the need that we have for building a new substation. We've learned, unfortunately, and great disappointment to be, there is no site without challenges. The difficulty that we found is, honestly, what I had hoped for at the beginning of this process is we'd reach this point and say, here's the one site that clearly everyone can agree on and it doesn't have any challenges. Despite all of that work, we have not been able to find a particular site that meets everyone's needs. We've certainly learned very clearly the unique challenges associated with lake views. We build substations in a really beautiful place in Chelan County. And there are lots of issues associated with views, mountain views, other aesthetic concerns, but the unique challenges associated with trying to preserve lake views around Lake Chelan has made this a more difficult challenge than we have confronted with other substations that we've located in the valley. And we've also eliminated a lot of sites along the way. Again, we started with 18, and as many people as there are in the room here tonight, there would be a lot more if we were talking about the 18 sites. So along the way, we've taken a lot of things off the table that had significant aesthetic impacts, and candidly, we've lost some folks along the way because their interest got satisfied because we took a site off the list. So what are we going to do tonight? First of all, the most important thing that we're doing here tonight is to get your comments. But in order to do that, there's a couple things that we want to do first. We want to explain to you what the staff recommendation is going to be. So we're down to 2 sites. At this point, the staff is going to make a recommendation to the board. We want to explain to you what our recommendation is and why we came to that conclusion. We want to answer your questions about that. So any clarifying questions that you might have about that, we want to be able to answer those. We're going to try to get all of that out of the way as quickly as we can so that we can get to hearing your comments. I want you to understand that most likely in this room we have people who have various levels of information. We have people who have been with us every step of the way for 2 years, and other people who've come to this process more recently. So what we're going to try to do is go through our presentation. If you could, let us go through and
Probably one of the doors opening.
okay. Since we just did the shake, drop, and roll drill, I was a little worried there for a second. So what I'm going to ask you to do is let us go through the presentation. Some of you even received the presentation earlier today, but not everyone. So give us a chance just to go through so we get everyone to the same place. And we'll ask if you can do that without questions. But if you have a question, write it down. You should have index cards on your chairs. So write your question. If you have a clarifying question, write it down. We'll collect them along the way. As soon as we finish the presentation, we'll answer questions. And then from there, we'll go to taking comment. I expect that if we are able to do this without interruption, we can get through our entire presentation in less than 30 minutes. So it's not going to make you sit for a long time in order to comment. One other thing I want to say, just to be clear. So we have a lot of staff here who can answer questions. At the end of the day, the staff recommendation is my personal accountability to the board. So I take responsibility for making this recommendation to the board. Now, having said that, at the end of the day, it's not my authority to make the decision. It's the board's decision to make. So what will happen from this is the board will have the recommendation from me in full transparency. You're seeing what my recommendation is to the board. And then from there, the board will make a decision based on our recommendation and public comment. So I can't predict what the outcome of that will be. They get to make that decision. So with that, I think what we're going to do is try to lay out, Sean is going to lay out just how the process will work this evening.
Great, thank you, Steve. So, again, if you don't have the materials, they'll be in the back. The handout or the presentation itself is back there. And again, I want to emphasize, if you haven't signed in at all, please do. And signify if you want to provide comments. And it's very important that we have your email address. That is our best way to reach everybody that's here tonight, is to be able to do that by email. So Steve laid out how the presentation of the rest of the evening is going to go. I'm just going to drill down a little more detail on that. So you've all had the blue index cards on your chair. Those are for your clarifying questions. And if you need more cards, we'll get you more cards. So Jenna and Rebecca will be walking around. If you have a clarifying question, please raise your hand with a card. They'll come by and get it. And if you want another card, they'll give it to you. So then as we get those cards, and after we're done with the presentation, staff will be responding to those as needed. We're going to limit them to 2 minutes. And after we're done with those, make sure that all the questions have been answered. We'll move into the public comment period. We're going to ask, there are some focus group members here tonight that would like to speak. We're going to ask them to go first. They're going to have a 5-minute opportunity to provide their comments. And after they're done, then we'll go into the general comment period, and we'll be asking everybody to provide 3 minutes, comments in 3 minutes. But if you can't get through, or if you have additional comments, after we've gotten through the initial round of comments, there'll be an opportunity to come back and provide more comments. Point is, we'll stay here tonight and take all the comments. So please, for consideration of others, if we keep them to 3 minutes, we'll come back around again for additional comments if needed. If you want to provide written comments, on the back table there is a box and some white index cards you can use. Drop those in the box, and again, please provide us your contact information. That'll allow us to get back to you if there's a need to get back to you on your comments. Again, we're here for the night, and we're going to get it kicked off with Gary Rice, who will give the overall of the presentation. Gary.
Thank you, Sean. Sorry. Hi, my name's Gary Rice. I'm a civil engineer and project manager for Chelan PUD, and I became involved with this process initially to bring a consultant on board to help us with evaluating substation site locations, a more detailed look at any site location that we should happen to find. We've evaluated several site locations, and like was mentioned earlier, we're down to 2 now, the Hellier and the Henderson Site. I'm also here to provide the staff recommendation for the substation site location that we believe to be the most feasible, given all the criteria that we've evaluated. The staff recommendation will have several considerations. 1 is public input. 2 would be the focus group input that we have had along the way. The 3rd would be the consultant analysis. And then a new piece of information that we have is we asked our internal engineering and operations staff to dive back into what we developed as part of the focus group, some of the site criteria, figure out what's most important to them, and then rank the 2 sites against each other on those. So I'll present that as well. I'll also have some additional information that staff has developed since the September 25th focus group meeting. The September focus group meeting, just a second. Oh, sorry. The September 25th focus group meeting that we had also had a lot of community group members there, or just community members there as well. So it wasn't just the focus group. We've had comments since that September 25th meeting, and we've tried to group that into themes of comment that we've had since September 25th. One of the initial ones were the views. The main question was, will a substation and the overhead lines negatively impact views? Then we moved into, can all new lines be put underground, or they should be put underground was the recommendation. Existing lines should be put underground as well. And can we explore funding options for putting underground or lines underground? The substation site should be located away from view corridors and residential areas. There was concerns about noise and light and what a substation looks like once built. And there were concerns about adding infrastructure in established residential areas. The result of that September 25th focus group meeting and community group meeting was that the Henderson site was not acceptable due to the high number of view impacts, and the Hellier site was acceptable under certain conditions. And those conditions were that the transmission, about 6/10 of a mile, would be undergrounded, that we'd locate the substation further away from Boyd Road, and that we'd underground all the distribution. Our initial cut at looking both Henderson and Hellier had some overhead distribution. Since the recommendation was for underground transmission, we decided in this presentation to go back and revisit some work that we did back in May, where we reviewed underground transmission. The cost of underground transmission is quite a bit more, but there's also operational considerations with underground transmission. Chelan PUD is not set up to work on underground transmission and doesn't stock the parts for it. Overhead transmission runs about $1 to $2 million a mile, and underground transmission runs $7 to $13 million a mile. For the 6/10 of a mile that we're talking about with the Hellier site, in order to make it comply with what the community desired, the cost of that would be somewhere between $4.3 and $8 million for putting that overhead or underground transmission in. The staff looked at those costs and really struggled with how to deal with that. We had the Hellier site being preferred, yet with a condition that we didn't feel that we could support in a recommendation. So we didn't know exactly where that left us. So we knew that we needed to look further. We needed to look at other things. One thing that we did is we decided to gather more input. We wanted to take a look at what engineering and operations had to offer as far as opinions on the Hellier versus the Henderson site. So what we asked them to do was take a look at the focus group site criteria and come up with site differentials, we're calling them. And a site differential is nothing more than a specific engineering and operational aspect to consider for a substation. These are the things that mean a lot to the people who are operating and maintaining substations. So they came up with 7 things to evaluate the Henderson and Hellier site against each other on. The first one was access of the mobile substation. The Hellier site is located along Boyd Road, and it has fairly good access. Boyd Road is kind of steep. It may involve some road closures or temporary road closures to get a mobile substation up to the site, but it could be done, we thought. The Henderson site's even more difficult. Henderson Road is even more steep, more curvy, and once you got to the location that's proposed for the Henderson substation site, it's down in a hole a little bit, and the transition to get down there and back up, even though we felt it would be feasible, it's more difficult. So the Hellier site scored higher on that one. Distribution line route options. This is getting the power out of the substation once you have a substation in place. This Henderson site is located closer to the load center and has more options to move the power out to where it's needed on shorter routes, so it scored higher. And on that same note, the Hellier site, if we were to underground everything, would require that we came down Boyd Road with all of the distribution lines underground, and there was just a lot longer distances to go. Proximity to transmission. The Hellier site, like we said, was 6/10 of a mile long, and the Henderson site is only 1/10 of a mile long. It's actually just adjacent to the transmission line, so that's more favorable. The transmission redundancy. This one may be a little bit harder to understand, but it's very important from a reliability standpoint. When we're looking at the Henderson site, because it's just directly adjacent to a transmission line, you can actually cut that transmission line and then go into the substation through a set of switches and then back out of the substation. What that does is that provides the operational flexibility to be able to feed the substation from 2 different directions. If a portion of the transmission line were to go out for some reason, we could still feed that substation and serve customers. So that's called a loop transmission. That's where you can go into the substation and back out and feed from 2 different directions. If we looked at doing that to the Hellier site, that would be possible, but what it would require is to bring that same cut transmission into the Hellier site 6/10 of a mile, And it could either be done on the same pole structure, similar to what we have right now in Leavenworth, but that would hang more lines in the air. There would be twice as many lines in the air to do that. Or you come down on 2 transmission routes or 2 pole lines. The view impacts would be very high to do that. So we costed out the Hellier site being just a tap, not having that loop. You lose reliability, but you gain some in aesthetics. Transmission, proximity to the load center. The Henderson site is closer to the load center. That one's pretty straight up. And when we move into aesthetics, the substation itself, the view impacts, the Hellier site is better tucked in away from the road. It's adjacent to the road, I should say, but it's configured such that you don't notice it due to land features as much as the Henderson site, which would be viewed back, rear view, side view from the Chelan Hills properties. And also, the way we did the analysis, we had some overhead distribution lines, and those overhead distribution lines would also be seen. Transmission line view impacts, for that reason, the Hellier site was preferable from a substation aesthetic impact. Transmission line view impacts, it just comes down to the amount of the distance of the transmission lines, and it's about 1/10 of a mile on the Henderson and 6/10 of a mile on Hellier. So 5 out of the 7 under engineering and operational considerations do support the Henderson site. So what is our next step? Next, we're going to look at the aesthetics and cost comparisons that was largely due to our consultant's effort in summarizing the costs and the aspects of each of the substation alternatives. When we look at this list here, we look at cost comparison, lake view impact, total view impact, total transmission line miles, total distribution line miles, and the estimates of the easements needed. In all but one category, the Henderson site did come to the top on that. But you'll notice the one area that didn't was the total view impact estimate. And that's also in support of what the community group was saying, was the Henderson site is going to have more of a view impact than what the Hellier site would have. So even though we're getting now the engineering and operations indicating that the Henderson site would be better, and we're also getting the cost and aesthetic comparisons as a group, 5 out of the 6 saying that the Henderson site is better, we're still recognizing that those view impacts that were identified are high. So we were looking at what to do with that. So what we decided as staff, and this is after the September 25th meeting, we decided we needed to take a really good close look at this and figure something out. So we went back to the Hellier site and we thought, how do we make it, actually I was going to say Hellier. We went back to the Hellier site, and we took a good hard look at that transmission line, that 6/10 of a mile, and the cost of that. And it was, the middle cost is about $6 million. And does that really help the aesthetics? We would be looking at these aesthetic numbers, total view of 61. But there may be areas there that don't completely represent it because we haven't really advertised that as much either. We'd be building transmission lines, which are pretty pronounced. So, and the cost would add $6 million to the cost. So if you add the $6 million to the cost, we're at about $16 million versus about $8 million. It's about double. So staff just couldn't really get behind supporting the Hellier site unless we went overhead and went away from what the community group recommendation was. If we do that, you're looking at the costs that you have in front of you right now. Those were costed out as being overhead transmission, $10 million versus $8 million, and then all the rest of the information on this page. So what we decided to do was take a deeper look at Henderson. Is there anything that we could do on Henderson, moving away from our initial assumptions that we had, that could maybe answer some of the questions that we had or that were brought to our attention at that September 25th meeting, mainly geared around aesthetics. And with aesthetics, it was overhead transmission, the substation itself, and just anything we could do at Henderson to make that a little bit more palatable. And here's what we came up with. If you take a look at this slide, this is moving away from the initial assumptions of the Henderson site that we had. When we looked at the Henderson and Hellyer together, we were really looking at apples to apples. We were trying to compare everything straight across. What we're doing now is we're moving away from that. We're saying we're going to take a good look at the Henderson site and how can we change that to make it better. We did have on the initial estimate for the Henderson site circuit paths that went out to the east and went out to the west, and both of those were overhead until they got into more populated areas than went underground. We recognize that as being a high aesthetic impact. So what we have done in this view is we're trying to show the new above ground features that we would have if we made a few changes, and that is undergrounding all of the distribution lines. And if that were the case, you would have what you see in front of you. The dark box is the fence line of the substation itself, and the light blue lines are the transmission tap. Those both would be visible and they'd both be new if we went with this Henderson substation site with the alternative of undergrounding all the distribution. What we've changed from the initial assumption was we were going to go to the east, to the Chelan Hills area overhead, then go underground. What we're proposing now is to go completely west up to Henderson underground with all 4 circuits. Next slide. So this is showing what you wouldn't see, but it is construction areas. These would be the circuit paths if we changed and went all underground and tried not to go to the Chelan Hills development, but instead head out to the Henderson Road with 4 circuits underground up to Henderson Road, 1 to the right and 3 down to the left down to Boyd Road. What we get out of this is some economies of scale. When you're putting 2 or 3 circuits in the same trench, you get to save a little bit of money in doing that. And then what we also came up with was this configuration could serve our immediate load, our immediate need that we have, but it doesn't build out all of the circuits at the same time. So the original comparison between Henderson and Hellyer was an example of where we built out all of the circuits. What we're doing here is as soon as we get to Boyd Road, we're saving 1 circuit for future growth. We don't know exactly where that would go, likely up Boyd Road somewhere and then turn off to feed growth. So we wouldn't build out all of the circuits completely, and we'd put them all underground. So this slide shows where construction areas would be, where circuits would go, but you wouldn't see anything above ground. So what we've done here is we've added that 3rd column. The gray was a comparison apples to apples, and now we've moved over to the yellow highlight, which is taking the Henderson a step further, taking a closer look, going underground with the distribution, and sharing some economies of scale by putting several circuits in the roadway in the same trench. So the one thing that might jump out at you is the cost went down, and we are undergrounding. So we've all heard that when you underground, the costs go up. The savings in this is where we are not going to build out all of the circuits at this time, and we're going to benefit from economies of scale by putting circuits in the same trench. This example does represent that we would not go through the Chelan Hills neighborhood. We have Lakeview impacts have gone from 9 down to 4. That's because of the above ground transmission lines, above ground distribution lines being eliminated. And the total view impacts have dropped by 20. 5 of those are from the Lakeview impacts. The other 15 was an estimate of view impact savings by not having overhead transmission heading east towards Chelan Hills. The total line miles for transmission stays the same. We're still making the same tap. We can't avoid making that tap from the transmission line. And total distribution line miles, this is what you saw on the yellow pathways. It went down a little bit, and the reason that went down is because we're not building out all the circuits at this time. We're saving that one going up Boyd Road for later. Easements would also reduce. We would go from 8 down to 4, and that's again because we're not running the 1 circuit towards Chelan Hills. And again, what that leaves us with is we didn't solve everything. We've chosen to recommend that we go the Henderson route. We've chosen some improvements that we think we can make, and we're here to some of the things we still have in our toolbox that we would apply to any new substation, but we would tailor it to the substation at hand. We heard that lighting is a concern. We're looking at down lighting. Security likes to have lighting. It doesn't have to be just the bright lights out there. It can maybe be lights, LED lights that focus at the ground. We may even be able to put motion sensors on those that would help them stay dark until something triggers a motion sensor. Of course, whenever we have a call out to the substation, we would turn on larger lights and light the place up while we're doing our work there if there's an emergency. Landscaping, there's visual buffers we can do. We would have to work with the community on that. We could tailor that to the specific area, trying to match what we have existing. In the background of this slide, you can actually see our Okanagan substation. That's what we did in a residential area in Wenatchee. It's not necessarily what we would do in Chelan North Shore. Noise, that's always fencing walls, that's also part that can be done in conjunction with the landscaping. Noise, there's latest technologies that we would implement on this project. One of the big ones is, if anyone's gone out to the Manson substation and tried to listen to it as a comparison, it's built on older technology. The transformer's fairly loud. With this one, we would use latest technologies, which tells us we're about 65 decibels, or about the same of a residential heat pump. There may also be sound barriers that we could investigate. We can work with profiles, heights and setbacks, orientation of the equipment, placement of access roads, and many of these things to try to help with hiding the substation the best we can. We can also work with timing and impact of construction activities, because it does take the better part of a year to build a substation. So this staff recommendation summary is that we purchased the Henderson Site, and that was supported by the engineering and operational comparison, also by the cost and aesthetics, but we're sensitive to the public input, and we're supporting doing a little bit of a shift to going underground with the distribution lines, and then doing everything that we can with the development of the substation itself as far as addressing the aesthetic impacts. The recommended timeline and next steps, we would like to go to the board at a November commission meeting. That is driven mainly by the end of November, well, the need for a substation for one, but also we have options on the properties that will expire at the end of November. And if the recommendation was approved, we would move forward with community outreach with neighbors and try to start designing toward the conditional use permit process, which is through the county. Initiate engineering design, all beginning in the fourth quarter of 2017, basically immediately. It takes about a year to design the substation. By the end of the fourth quarter of 2018, we would like to have that substation design complete along with the transmission tie-in, and then construction would be 2019, 2020. That's, again, if the board accepts our recommendation. We probably have some blue cards gathered, so I'll hand this over to Sean.
Jen and Rebecca, did anybody provide a question? I have a clarifying question. Does anybody have a question or that they'd like clarified based on the presentation? If not, we can move on into the public comment period. If you do, can you please come up to the mic just so we can get your question, your name and address, too, please.
I have to use a cane. I don't
Oh,
want
here.
to stop it.
Here you go.
I just want to clarify that with the Henderson site, now you're saying everything is going to be underground. Is that what you're saying? Portia Polly, 727 Golf Course Drive.
No, not everything. On that first slide I showed, we would have the substation built and also the tap to the transmission line. You want to back up to that, Tika? Right there, we would have the substation itself would be above ground. And then the blue lines that you see right here, tapping to the existing transmission line, those would be above ground lines. We also have a rendering of that in the back over there.
Everything else would be underground.
Everything else would be underground. Oh, I'll make this clarification on my own. Anything new proposed There are existing, in the pathways that we're talking about going, there's existing overhead distribution lines that are serving residences. These new feeder lines, they would go underground, but anything that's existing right now would stay as it is.
What's the length of those blue lines? The above ground.
So I'll repeat for you to make sure, because we're recording, so we have to make sure. And the question was, what is the length of the blue lines, the transmission lines? And your name again, please?
Virginia Beckley, 225 Boyd Road.
Thank you.
We're saying about 500 feet.
Okay, then we will go ahead and jump into the public comment period. Yes, you wanted to remind me that the focus group members, and I want to just make sure we introduce, I think not all the focus group members here, but if you are here, if you just want to stand and raise your hand and I call your name, appreciate it. So Fred Cleveland, Tom Anglin, Michael Gibb, oh, Michael's here, John Dreyer, Sue Crinklaw, Wendy Eisenhart, Kelly Allen, Steve Furman, and Guy Evans. So they were the focus group that spent a lot of time working on this process. So we have, oh, here they are. We had a number of people, we had about 22 people that signed in, either that they want to, we have a blue card. Just a second, I'm on a late blue card, Phil. Okay, so we're going to answer this card and then we'll go ahead and get back into the public comment. So what are the true health impacts of living near a substation? And who wants to take that on, that question? Is that Andy or Chad? Whether you would like to answer the questions about impacts, health impacts on living near a substation.
So Chad Rissman, I'm the Director of Engineering Asset Management for the Distribution Department. I'm an engineer, not a doctor, so I can just talk a little bit about electromagnetic fields, how they are generated, and how they get generated. Electromagnetic fields are generated from alternating current flow. The magnitude of those electromagnetic fields intensify with the amount of current that is flowing. So the closer you are to the source and the higher the current that's flowing, the intensity of those electromagnetic fields increases. So with the substation, there's a maximum of about 1,200 amps. Your panel in your house is 200 amps. So there's the higher voltages actually reduces the amount of current, which is one of the advantages of increasing the voltage levels. So as voltage goes down, the same amount of power requires additional current. As far as the health effects go, I would point to our website. Tika's done a fantastic job of citing several papers that have done by the American Cancer Society and others talking about the health effects. Andy and I and others have spent the last 20 years investigating this just from an anecdotal standpoint. We have what we call a Gauss meter. It's measured in the units. Electromagnetic fields, oftentimes what we'll find inside homes close to microwaves, hair dryers, and things is much higher than what we'll find outside the fence of a substation. So we have linemen and wiremen that work on this stuff their entire careers. So we all hope that, and myself, I'm close to it all the time, closer than all of you. So I hope that there isn't any negative effects. But thanks.
Okay, with that, the way this is going to work, we're going to start out with some focus group members. They're going to have 5 minutes. We are going to time you, and I'm going to use this little device here to give you a 1 minute notice. You'll see that when you have 1 minute left, and then when you have 20 seconds left, you'll see that. And we have about an hour's worth, maybe a little more of comments. So we want to try and get through everybody with that first round and honor their time here tonight. So with that, I am going to start out the first focus group member who wanted to make any comments was Tom Anglin. Tom, you can come to the mic and just again announce your name and your address for the record. Thank you.
Tom Anglin, 216 Pinnacle Place. I have been with the focus group from the very beginning, and first of all, I just want to compliment the PUD. I think they have shown the utmost in professionalism and the patience. It was a long process, and I just basically want to say we tried our very best to pick out sites that were going to be the lowest impact on the public, but trying to get property owners to go along with a substation on their property was difficult. So anyway, I've heard a lot of comments about, the substation is going to ruin deer passages and the deer herds and whatever. PUD has a photograph of their Leavenworth substation with a doe and a fawn laying down next to the fence of a substation. And I think that people who live in Chelan Hills, the deer herd there are very domesticated and so on. We had an opportunity to go out to the Bear Mountain substation, and which is older technology. It's not going to be as quiet as the new one, as Chad pointed out. But I went out to the fence line there, and it was very minimal noise. Lighting, I look around, I've driven up through those areas, and I see orchards with street lights type lighting out there all over the place. I've looked at the PUD sites, and I'm sure that with motion detectors and so on, they can be mitigated. This is not going to be there's no win-win here. Somebody's not going to be happy, but I think that I just wanted to say that I think that the PUD has done the very best they could over a 2-year period, trying to pick a site that would best serve the load that is coming down the road.
Great, thank you, Tom. Michael Gibb.
Good evening, Michael Gibb, 116 Coyote Hill Road, just off of Boyd Road. That's where Sue and I live. I've been involved with the siting process and the focus group for about the last 2.5 years, I think it is. And it's been quite a journey, and there's been a lot of learnings. But before I make a few quick comments, I really want to thank all the commissioners and Mr. Wright for coming all the way up here to Chelan. You all live down in Wenatchee or other areas down south, so thanks for being here. And I know that you live right here in the Chelan Valley. I also want to thank the staff. You folks have been great to work with, absolutely. And we've seen flexibility. We've seen a lot of sensitivity on your part for general public input, and I really appreciate that. We've all heard that there's like 500 new homes coming to the Chelan Valley area. And here we are, hopefully in the 11th hour of the siting of the North Shore substation. Has anybody heard of Holiday Hills? Holiday Hills is planned for the South Shore. And I can't remember how many homes it is, but it's like hundreds of units. So the learnings from this last 2.5 years are so important as we move forward. And I have a few comments that I think will highlight those learnings. Number one, we need a bigger boat, and we need to cast a broader net. The process started 2.5, 3 years ago, really not very transparently and sort of not very high visibility to the public. It didn't go well. And from that, the focus group and the much more transparent, open process was born. But even with the advisory committee involved, we need to cast a broader net. We need to focus more on outreach to get representatives from every neighborhood in an affected area involved early on, even with site criteria and site potential identification. So I think that's one learning. I've learned transmission underbuild and express feeders are swear words. They're absolutely curses. And we've learned through this process that when we go way out, such as behind the golf course or out to Chelan Heights, and we have to bring express feeders and taller poles back to the load station, that's just not going to work. And I'm so glad that as we pushed back against that, you listened to that and you flexed in a different way. I learned some new math through this process. I learned the substation equation. Maybe you've heard of it before, but it goes like this. The level of participation, emotion, and engagement in the substation siting process is directly proportional to the proximity of your house to the location of the proposed site. NIMBY is alive and well in this process. Another learning for the future, go below before we grow. So much growth going on in the Chelan Valley. Like Wenatchee, like Leavenworth, we have some beautiful views to protect here. And so we need to make sure that that's our guideline as we move forward. Go below, underground, before we grow. Sue and I, when we would bring the kids when they were small from Seattle over to Wapato Point, we'd come through the tunnel and down the hill, and the first person that could see the lake would say, "I see the lake." I'll always remember that. Well, we need to see the lake. So aesthetics, view corridors, visual impact, neighborhood protection are higher priorities than engineering efficiencies and load lines proximity to most ratepayers in the Lake Chelan Valley. Just two more. Power before profit. The city of Chelan, the county of Chelan, Chelan PUD, and all of us that live here need to get involved early on when developers and planners are starting to think about building new neighborhoods. And when they do that, the infrastructure for electrical needs to be addressed right up front and paid for by the developers. Substation sites need to be their first neighborhoods grow up around. Lastly, as long as we're here, I think it's great that looking at your recommendation tonight, all new distribution will be underground. Fantastic. We still have other things we need to address, such as the direct view from the Pinnacle neighborhood and from Robin and Corky's and other folks up on Henderson looking at the substation. We need to go way out of our way with green screening, maybe even trees up the valley a little bit towards those places to make sure that they're not looking at the substation. As long as we're changing some of our paradigms, let's let go of this guideline that we can't change what's already there. So in the case of Henderson Road area, because we're going to go, it sounds, underground with the distribution, there's a distribution line that cuts across that area. Let's put that underground also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And then John Dreyer, please.
Sorry, Michael, I'm a little bit taller there. My name is John Dreyer. I've met most of you. Good evening, commissioners, and Mr. Wright. I've met you and the staff. I want to echo first what Michael has said. This has been a 2+ year journey, and what we got from that was we've met some very, very wonderful people, well-intentioned people. Some of the staff here I consider very close, and we've had lots of conversations about which sites, all the concerns that have come up. Just to give you a quick background, let me read from this. My typing and my reading are both a little suspect here, but my background has been working with the Tacoma PUD, as I mentioned to Mr. Wright, and I've also been in contact with substation builders across the nation, done some research, a lot of research actually, on undergrounding and the cost of that. I will respectfully disagree with the cost that has been presented because the cost factors depend on a lot of variables, terrain, things of that nature. What I have found so far is that the undergrounding 0.6 of a mile is approximately about $1 million. That's a lot different from $4 million. And then the second question is, we have the loop system for the Henderson Site you're talking about, which ties into the transmission lines. Has there been any consideration of why we couldn't put that piece underground? They were talking about 1/10 of a mile. When we first started this process, went on lots of site reviews with other members of the focus group and with the staff. And we did look at properties that Mr. Henderson owned. And there were some that were farther up and hidden away, which would not have a visible impact on anybody. This site does have a visible impact, both the substation and the transmission line, on several homeowners, quite a few homeowners. Myself included, I never saw nothing but apple trees, and now I can look right out my front door and see where the substations are going to be and all the additional power lines there. We don't have an answer on will there be additional in the future lines on the transmission lines on the lower transmission line. One of the things that we stressed was to use the upper transmission lines, which is farther away and does not go in front of like Michael Gibbs' house or across the front of my house and other homes. And we had a site called Site 14, which we had a willing seller. But at that time, the staff said we wouldn't consider that because it was another, I think a half a mile or a mile away from the Hillier site. And that was in June 24th. And it was right underneath the upper transmission lines. Why we didn't pursue that further is a real question. I've spoken to Commissioner McKenna about the Winesap Boyd Loop Road, which is located so far away, and it's part of the cost was just getting back to the folks that need it, but it had no aesthetic impact whatsoever. It was right underneath the transmission lines and distribution lines there also. So those are two things that we should have looked at closer, and I think maybe we should spend a little more time than this, where we have to have a decision by November. When we first started 2.5 years ago, ironically enough, Mr. Henderson had made property available. The homeowners came to you and said, you're impacting our view, not of the lake, but you're impacting our view looking up the hillside. And I think I read your letter where you canceled that sales agreement. But now Mr. Henderson is selling you some property, which when we looked, we thought was going to be down in the valley where you couldn't see it. Now it's going to be up closer to the road where it's quite visible to a lot of homeowners. And it impacts not only looking up the hill, but also the lake view, which is quite different. And so the question is, why are we going to consider that as a viable site when you had another site that didn't impact lake views and this one does? So Lastly, the contract we had with Mr. Henderson was for 9 months. So it gave us plenty of time to evaluate that situation and make a determined, considered determination of whether or not it was a viable site or other sites. When we spoke the last time with the focus group, one of the things we talked about, if these sites don't work, we have to go back and start looking again at some other site. And I think there are a couple other sites that we should consider, not the Henderson site. The Henderson site just won't work, and we can't mitigate it because of where it's located. The substation itself is located, and those transmission lines are right in the view of a lot of homeowners. So,
Mr. Dreyer, you had a couple questions. Would you like the staff to respond to those right now or get back to you on those?
I don't think it's fair to have a debate.
Okay.
Because there's other people who want to speak. But my request is going to be to have the staff renegotiate the sales agreement and add a couple months to it, not maybe to the end of the year at least, and tell both sides so that we are fully vetted and so we fully understand what we're getting ourselves into in terms of impact. One of the things that was said is, we're not going to do this now. So the question is, what are you going to do later? And will that have more impact on people? Especially since the buildings are going towards Manson. Does that mean we're going to have to up the transmission lines?
So we've captured that request. It's being recorded. And do you have any final comments, Mr. Dreyer?
Yes, I do. I first want to thank Ann for coming out, maybe I should, Commissioner Cogden, for meeting with both our president and vice president, for making site visits. She's done a remarkable job. Well-intentions, and we talked about planting trees and things of that nature. It takes 10 years for trees. 10 years from now, I don't know if I'm still going to be around, but there's a lot of mitigation that needs to be done on that site versus the other. And I think it's a short-term, long-term process. Okay. The long-term will be building towards Manson, and the other site will work if we can underground there.
Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. So we're going to move into the general comments now. And again, we're going to go down to a 3-minute period. And I'm just going to go down the list here. And I'll apologize right up front. Some of the names, I'm going to probably have to get the first name and the address. I won't be able to get both the first and last name. So the first Larry, and it's 80 Willow Point Road. You are a question mark. Would you like to provide any comments?
Yeah, just quick. I just had a quick question. Are you going to?
I'm sorry. Could your name and address?
My name is Larry Yonk. I live at 80 Willow Point Road in Manson. Is that
on here, or is it further down the road there?
Way down the pike.
Okay, thank you.
I was just curious, will this construction work be done in-house, or are you going to bid it out?
We'll bid it out.
Very good, thank you. Next on the list, I think, is Judy, or Rodney, 240 Deepwater View. Do you want to make any comments? Okay, thank you. Then we have John Swenson. John, would you like to provide any comments?
Only that I think Mr. Dreyer did an excellent job of my concerns. The only additional one would be, oops.
Yeah, we'll have Thank you.
I get it down to my size, John. Sorry.
And again, your name, address?
John Swenson, 219 Riviera Drive, Chelan.
Is that on?
Not affected directly.
Okay, thank you.
I think John Dreyer did an excellent presentation representing Chelan Hills. The one question I had, and this is a rumor that I hope is false, but my understanding is the Henderson site, they're requiring the purchase of 2 lots of land, and this is focused on one of those lots, and that the second lot will be in the possession of the PUD, but what is the future plan for that? But this is a rumor, so I just want the clarification.
I'm sorry I didn't get the question, but I will give it to Chad.
So thanks for the question. Question was the Henderson site does include the purchase of the original property that the PUD had an option on with Mr. Henderson. So when we reapproached Mr. Henderson about a second site, Mr. Henderson, as a part of the contract, said that you were going to purchase that original site. We have committed to not building a substation there. We have not evaluated that into the price. We feel like that's probably marketable, but we are not planning on building a substation there or electrical infrastructure. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Stay below the 1 minute, thank you. Next on the list, I believe it's Dennis, 1390 Summit Boulevard. Is it Dennis? And he is good not to. And then Tom Clark. Was he? Yes. Tom Clark. And Tom, again, are you living there on this map at all, or are you off this site, off the site?
No, I'm not on the map at all. I live in Okanagan County.
Okay.
I'm on the grid, the Slang County
Okay.
grid. And I'm here as a public advocate tonight. I don't have a dog in this fight except that the interest of all Chelan County PUD owners. This is the second meeting I've come to. I came to the first. I saw the way things were leaning, and I watched the news since then. And to make it real short, my appraisal of the situation is this. Alan Simpson, former U.S. Senator, quoted, or I'll quote him, "If you have integrity, nothing else matters. If you don't have integrity, nothing else matters." You can choose which side of this that the majority of the persons in this room are on. What I have heard is people expecting all Chelan County PUD owners to subsidize their lifestyles. When my family came here in 1944, they came in a flatbed truck, in the back of a flatbed truck, came into this valley, and there were no houses on these hillsides. Now there are multi-million-dollar houses on these hillsides, and there are houses that are into the hundreds of thousands of dollars worth. But there are no houses on these hillsides that a working man can rent or afford to rent. And to expect those people to subsidize lake views or hill views for people that are not even concerned about the rest of the ratepayer owners of Chelan County PUD is wrong. And that's the reason I haven't been to any of the meetings except the first one, and hopefully this will be the last one. Because as has been testified to, this has been a very expensive process. And the ratepayers, they have a hard time paying their power bills, are paying for this too. It doesn't even affect the people who have these multi-million-dollar homes and homes that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars on the hillsides that are concerned about their view of the lake or the view of a hillside. They're not concerned about the expense. I've had a report of one home that the person that owned it might not be here but once or twice a year, left the heat on, the air conditioning on, all year long. Get $4,000 a year for power.
So, Mr. Clark, can I get you to go ahead and finish up your comments, please?
Yeah. So I encourage you to consider all Chelan County PD owners when you make a decision on how much money to spend from this point on. And I would even encourage you to make a decision tonight and announce it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Cleveland, we missed you, focus group member. And would you like to make your comments? I apologize for that. We missed you on that.
I'm Fred Cleveland at 201 Crescent Street. And there was a question about electrical fields. Chad answered. And one thing that some people didn't understand in earlier meetings I attended was that underground distribution lines do not emit fields out of the earth. So you have no, as far as I know, there's no safety concern if you are close to a buried distribution line. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. So next we have Kathy Branch. Kathy, thank you. And also, can you tell us, is your home located within here?
Yes, you can see my home very clearly. I live at 335 Henderson.
Okay, thank you.
My two homes. Yeah.
Great.
I live here 365 days out of the year. And I've invested heavily in my property. And I just want to say I'm one of the redheaded stepchildren that live on Henderson Road that are being thrown under the bus here. I have lots of documentation regarding property values and proximity to substations and transmission lines. I don't guess I'll bore you all with them, but some of these come from your own trade journals from your industry. And these figures can fall anywhere between 10 to 42% reduction in property value. That is too much to expect a handful of us to give up. I do not believe that this site is the be-all, end-all, and it is going to affect my personal old age. I worked a lifetime for this, and there was never any possibility that this was going to be located there until very recently. When I was asked last year whether I would give up part of my 6 acres to build a substation, my response immediately was, I would not do that to my neighbors. I wouldn't see it, they would. So I'm asking the same. I'm asking that you do not pass the trash here and ask us, the handful of us, to give up so much of our property value. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Corky Thorson, please.
Robin's going to take my place instead. I'll speak after her if that's okay.
That's fine, sure. Excuse me, I'm just going to turn this off because it keeps lying to me in the eyes. Thank you.
Okay. Robin Vogel, 63 Balsam Drive, Chelan, and point out our house. We're right here. We're going to have a bird's eye view. Thank you for the opportunity to comment once again on this extremely important topic. Of all the proposed sites we've been privy to during this approximately 15-month process for us, the current Henderson site is the absolute worst of the worst as far as negative financial impact to our home and property, as well as huge downside to our enjoyment of our quiet hilltop. And we are not the only ones, as many of our Chelan Hills neighbors will be negatively affected, and you just heard from our neighbor below us, Kathy Branch. We'd like to show a couple photos here of our property so that board members who haven't seen it and audience members have a better idea of why we're so opposed to the Henderson site. And I'll point out here, this is an overview of our property. Oh, thank you. This is an overview of our property. Right here is where the substation is going to be. We're going to be looking down on it. I don't know how they're going to mitigate views or noise looking down on this with no noise barriers whatsoever. We also have another building lot right here which is going to be looking right down on it towards its lake view. We have another building out here, which we don't know what's going to happen with the transmission lines that are currently in front of our home. No one's been able to give us a straight answer yet. Not only will our home and adjacent building lots have a direct line of sight to the substation, less than 160 yards down the hill in our direct lake view, but we'll be able to hear it 24/7, 365. As there's no noise barrier of any kind between us and the proposed substation. We've heard a lot about mitigation so far. Mitigation is not elimination, and it's impossible to acceptably eliminate the negative aesthetics and noise from a substation plunked at the bottom of our driveway. We will be subjected to more and fatter transmission poles, although no one can give us specifics, all in direct lake view of either, again, our home or adjacent building lots. It's been impossible for us to comprehend why PUD has continued to try to get us to agree with the Henderson site when their plan will cause us permanent, real, and significant economic damage. I'm not sure I can adequately describe the visceral, gut-wrenching emotions of the prospect of seeing a large substation every time I drive into or out of my driveway, every time I sit on the lakeside or the garden side of my deck, every time I look down the hillside toward a formerly empty gully, and every time I look toward downtown Chelan and the lake beyond. It cannot be overstated that the undeniable prospect of hearing the hum from said substation all night long as we have our windows open 9 to 10 months out of the year, where before all I would hear is a coyote howl, an owl, crickets, or just abject silence. It's appalling. The prospect of having our formerly star-filled dark sky lit up by a substation security lighting is difficult to contemplate. The prospect of losing 1/3 to half or more of the value of a property we never intended to sell, ever, is overwhelming. I don't know how to help the members of this board understand how devastating this is to us when there's an alternative that will not do damage to the surrounding property owners at the Hellier site. Yes, it may cost a bit more, and we understand you have a responsibility to be cost effective, but you also have a responsibility to protect the natural resources of this lake, of this valley, and this includes private and public view corridors.
So can you conclude? Or
I'm sorry, but since my property is the one that's going to be affected the most, and I've driven at least 9 or 10 one-day turnarounds from Kirkland to Wenatchee to attend PUD commissioner meetings, as these people well know, I'm going to take probably about 4 minutes total, if I may.
You can, then this will conclude your comments for the evening?
Yes, it will.
Okay.
It's not right to destroy property values in the quest to build a substation in the least expensive manner possible, when it's not the best manner possible. There's a completely viable alternative at the Hellier site that even as of today has no objections on the PUD public comment page. If PUD follows the adage, first do no harm. The sticking point is the undergrounding of the 0.6 of a mile of new transmission line slated to run along Boyd and Perdaman Road. A competitive bidding process must be put forth in an earnest and good faith effort to come up with a reasonable cost for performing this work. As a successful professional realtor for the past 16 years and a real estate investor for the past 28 years, I can state unequivocally, a property with a lake view costs more than a property without one. Inserting a substation or power poles and lines into a lake view will reduce the value of that property. We will have both at the Henderson site, and it will decimate our property values. This is not opinion, this is indisputable fact, and it's why we are so adamantly opposed to the Henderson site. We beg of the PUD commissioners to reconsider Henderson. We are more than willing to work with PUD to come up with solutions to create an acceptable alternative at the Hellier area site. I thank you for listening to our concerns. I apologize for my emotions, but this has been an extremely emotional roller coaster when I look at a big chunk of my financial retirement nest egg sitting here that you people are about to destroy. We will be submitting copies of a more detailed version of these public comments. We also have a very long list of questions that we would like responses to. We'll submit those in hard copy to your site.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Corky Thorson, do you want to follow up with your time now too?
Absolutely. Corky Thorson, 63 Balsam Drive. The commissioners know me. Commissioners, good to see you. Thanks for coming tonight. Staff, appreciate it. First thing, before I get into my spiel here, I have something I put together today. I'd like to address Mr. Clark's generalization here about rich people, if that's where he's throwing me, because I have a view property. I grew up with absolutely nothing. I worked 5 years logging, high-lead logging, where my best buddy died. I went through WSU, worked my way through school by logging, and then I worked 3 summers rappelling from helicopters with the Chelan crew for 1 summer, fighting wildland fires. I worked 33 years as an urban firefighter and a paramedic. I got into situations where I didn't think I was going to come back out alive, but I did. I made it. Like I said, I grew up with absolutely nothing. I built houses on the side. I worked for Bellevue Fire for 28 years after I left Dallas Fire Department. So whatever I have, I built on my own with help from Robin. So anyway, to address Mr. Clark's issue, not caring about other people, that's not the case. The commissioners can cite that we will donate $20,000 of our own cash money if there was going to be a temporary surcharge assessed for undergrounding any lines, any transmission lines from the Hellier site, that people who couldn't afford one more dollar on their bill, we would pay $20,000 toward that, and that would be about 150 homes it would take care of, Tom. So that's who I am. That's where I come from. So let me get on my spiel, because I know I'm burning daylight here.
Yes, I am going to hold you to your time.
Okay. Corky Thorson, 63 Balsam Drive, and I'm totally against the Henderson substation site because I own a lot and a house and another lot directly above them. It's going to decimate the value of those properties and the enjoyment we have when we go up there to relax and get away from the beehive of Bellevue, Kirkland, Redmond. You all know what that's about. Now, they've talked mitigation. Mitigation is not going to solve the whole problem. Mitigation is not going to eliminate that site. It's going to be there. We're going to hear it. We're going to see it. I appreciate the notion of that, and I know Mr. McKenna has some ideas in that regard. He's going to talk to me about it. But I don't think that's going to really cut it. It's going to decimate our values. I'd also like to address the fact that 500 people from the Chelan Hills Homeowners Association, represented by John Dreyer and a couple other gentlemen here, have voted against the Henderson site, and there's been about 20 emails against it also. Well, there has not been one email supporting the Henderson site. So that's got to resonate with you folks. I hope it does. I feel the momentum pushing toward the Henderson site. I talked with Steve yesterday, and Steve and Ann were kind enough to come to my house and look at the view. But I implore you to rethink it. I think we can make the Hellier site work. I think that if you look at it, there's no view impacts from the Hellier site itself. No home looks at it. Just 1 minute, please. No home looks at it. I don't know where these numbers came from with 11 or what have you, but no one looks at it. Whereas our site, there's over a dozen homes look directly at it. So I'm going to bring it in for a landing because I know you want to rush on. Yes. Michael Gibb has a proposal. He mentioned one. He didn't mention it tonight, that he has a proposal to mitigate overhead transmission lines if they were to go up from the Hellier site up to the upper transmission line. I'd like to hear what that is. And if a line did go overhead there are 3 homes that are affected. 1 that goes behind them, and 2 have views into the orchard across the street. So those are the ones most impacted compared to everything we're going to see where we're at. That's it. I know you want to move on. Thank you.
You're welcome. Jerry Boyce. You're good. Thank you very much. We have Steve and Terry White. Been covered. Thank you. Bill Leffler. No? Thank you. We have is it Galen Mulver? Gail Ann? Oh, sorry.
My name is Gail Ann Mulver. I live here full time. I've been dreaming of living here since 1980.
So, if I may just clarify, where are you on your address?
I'm right here, 627 Chelan Ranch Road. It may
Not
not
on
be
that?
on there, but
Okay.
it's on here.
Oh, great, thank you.
Sort of covered up by your little
Our box.
thing. My husband was a police officer. He agreed to my dream of living here. Tragically, he died in January. And everything that we have is on the 20 acres that would probably look directly down at the Hellier site. I'm pretty careful to keep my lights low and not flood the hillside with lights that would compromise other people's stargazing, as I like to do. And I would just like to go on record as saying there are people who are not in favor of the Hellier site or any of the other sites that are possibly less densely populated. I'm hoping that the people that have larger chunks of land are not going to be skewed with some of this data that sort of represents the more densely populated areas. Not very eloquent, but those are my concerns.
Great, thank you. Next up, we have Virginia Beckley. Would you like to provide comments? Okay, I'm sorry, before you start, Commissioner Congdon, Gail Ann Mulver, correct? We'll give you the spelling off the charts. I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Virginia Carpenter Beckley. I live at 225 Boyd Road.
So is that off this as well? Is it up above?
Hellier
So
site.
near the Hellier site. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm across the road from where the substation would be at the Hellier site. I don't think I'd have a view of it because it's tucked back against the mountain and it's off to the side. But the proposal of the line showed it coming down across the road.
I'm sorry, I'm going to give
Down
you a little...
across the road and right along the edge of the property. I just took ownership. It's been in the family for 40 years, and I just took ownership last month. So I've been looking at the view for 5 years, taking care of my mother in the home, and really enjoying that view. And I'm thinking about big poles and heavy lines and going across that lower area. The Henderson site, which sounds like economically an easeway that you've kind of decided on, I did go up to the home, and it is really right in their backyard. It is right there. And what I don't understand, if my information is correct, and I might not be correct on the number of acres, but Henderson has, like, someone correct me, 800 acres? 800 acres. Surely on that 800 acres, there's something there besides right next to someone's driveway and house. So if you're going to consider Henderson as a perspective, talk to them about another piece of land. It's too close to those homes. It really is. And underground for the Dave Hillier is, if that's a possibility, I do think it is. It is feasible. And the neighborhood has offered to pay for any underground wiring throughout the next 5 years. In fact, let's see, Robin was going to bring an example of how that would pan out for monthly additions to our bills over the next 5 years that would pay for it. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Rick Cannon.
Rick Cannon, 103 Pyramid Place.
We'll go ahead and raise that for you.
Raise that? Okay.
Yeah. And is that Pyramid Place within this?
It's in Chelan Hills, down off of Butte Road.
So within this view?
No,
Off the view.
Below it, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway, I just wanted to make a clarification. There was a statement made that 500 people in the Chelan Hills area voted against the Henderson property. Well, I never voted, and I live in Chelan Hills, so however you can put that out. And I didn't give my proxy vote to the board or anybody. So when he made that statement that 500 people in Chelan Hills voted against it, I'd like to see all those votes and see that it was actually done, because I was never asked. And I did not give my proxy vote to anybody to come in and claim that I had voted for it. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a few maybes. Larry Summers? No? George Maribel?
George Maribel, 213 Pinnacle Place. I've been there.
Again, is that with on, is Pinnacle Place within? Great,
Yeah,
thanks,
thank
Tika.
So you're right there, right? Right here? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, right.
So they're just conferring that he is on there, back in the corner.
Thanks.
You're back in the corner of the visual.
Yeah. Well, I've been a business owner for 32 years, and I get it when you talk about costs. I really do. I've run a small business. I've had to pay my bills. I've done everything else. I've worked hard for all that time, and I finally am able to buy a house that my wife wanted in regards to being able to spend the summers here. That being said, if I were looking at the different sites now, the Henderson site doesn't make any sense to me. It's going to ultimately impact the second lot that you are buying, or that you are being forced to purchase for that Henderson lot. The second thing that really gets me as a business owner and being disingenuous about putting those lines and the effective areas of those lines underground is for a PUD that is looking to spend $114 to $178 million on a new facility. Boy, and you can't put 0.6 of a mile underground? Boy, I tell you, that's a hell of a business decision as far as I'm concerned. And I would just really request, I think the Hellier site, okay, maybe it doesn't work. Maybe it doesn't work. But and I think they're right in saying the Henderson has 800 acres. There's got to be something else that's more applicable, that's not going to affect us. And if you're going to spend that much money and be forced by an owner to buy that second lot, man, somebody doesn't have the negotiating strategy. Thank you.
So we have Catherine Benusa. No thanks. And Randy Bonson. Okay. And Brian McHardy. You know, I'm going to ask you if you're on the picture
Yes,
here.
yes, I am. I'm 120 Pinnacle.
Pinnacle.
Right adjacent to the site.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
To say that I'm incensed, John Dreyer, thank you, and your impassioned speeches. I've been past your house and looked at the sites. To say that I'm incensed is beyond words. I felt like I got cancer when this first site was, first go-around came up. And then there was a reprieve. I felt like it was a miracle. And then all of a sudden, it came back. To say that I'm not impacted is just, I have no words to actually describe it, and I'm just not as eloquent as some of the former people. I came to Chelan. I had a house out in Twisp, and it burned in the Carlton Complex fire. And I was looking for this Shangri-La, this little place up in the mountains. And yeah, it was next to the power lines that runs right behind my house. But I mitigated it, and I said, you know what, it's a beautiful view. I read all the studies from the World Health Organizations on EMFs and all the rest of it, try to get as educated as I could. And I mitigated it, and I bought a slightly dilapidated house for a lot of money. This was my nest egg. And here I am, and I have walked these sites, I've bicycled these sites, and I have really tried to delve into it to see, you know, how this was going to affect me. And it really does. If you're looking at that picture right there, you are looking at my house, at the side of my house. So I've looked at the Helier site as well, and it makes a heck of a lot more sense. This does not make any sense. A disgruntled orchard owner that pulls out his orchards, and the next minute there's land for sale. The original site is still for sale, and you said that you're not going to build on it. How do we know that? And I really believe that this is not the right thing to do. This has not been part of the community of Chelan Hills. This is not even for our power. This is for everybody else's power. And so I would ask you, really, can we not reconsider and listen to these good people here that are really going to be affected by this? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. That was everybody who had signed in either to yes, they would comment, or possibly or maybe. Is there anybody else who would like to make any additional comments or has not made any comments? So this gentleman who was standing up, if you want to come up, and you had a blue card for us over there, or is that? Okay, we'll get you next then.
Okay, my name is Bruce Hurst. I live at 178 Chelan Ranch Road. I really appreciated the process. It's taken a lot of time.
And I'm sorry to bother you again,
okay,
but
I'm close to the Hellier place.
Close to the Hellier place.
If above ground lines are put in, they'll cross my property, which I'm not really keen about, and I've written all the commissioners about that. And I also mentioned in that the aesthetic impact seems to be the biggest issue. If we could get around that, there'd probably be a lot of places we could put a substation in, more places, because you're probably going to run across this issue another time or two. And so the impression I got from the staff report is that they couldn't recommend the Hellier place because of cost. It was like $8 million more. And in an overall scheme of things, I guess $8 million doesn't seem to be insurmountable. They're that big. There's going to be a lot of new users coming online. Maybe they can help pay for that. And so this would sure make a lot of people happy if you had a policy of undergrounding. It would just save everybody a whole lot of grief down the road, I think. So I'd like you to consider that money isn't everything. Okay? Thank you.
Great, thank you. Gentleman back here was going to, and we'll get to you next here.
Tom Watson, 410 Henderson Road. I'm right in the middle of it.
Okay, thank you.
You had a map up here that showed from the site that you're recommending the power line coming down across Boyd Road and going up Lake. Is that correct?
I'm going to ask give this to Gary if you want to.
Are you talking about the yellow map that we had?
Yeah.
It came down to Boyd Road, then went up Boyd Road, but it stopped. It didn't go very far up Boyd Road, correct?
My question is, how far is it going to go?
Oh, when it does go, we had some earlier plans showing it going, I don't know, quite a ways up Boyd Road, then dropping off wherever power is needed in the future.
So basically what you're saying, you're going to use that for power below Boyd Road, out where all those orchards are, and where Crystal View and the one above it, which I don't know what the name of that one is, Legacy.
Yeah, it would
and
serve
that area, and that's where it's going to put power to.
It would serve wherever the growth is needed in the future. So it could go above or below Boyd Road, depending on where the building is.
Well, it's not going to provide any power for anything right now because there's nobody really doing much of anything in that area.
Are you talking about this upper one right here?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you talking about this circuit down here?
I'm talking about where
Boyd?
it comes across Boyd Road, it angles across Boyd Road, and it goes up Lake.
This one right here?
Yeah.
That's the way we show it here. It may take a lower turn.
But right now, where is the power that it has to provide right now? You see my point?
Crystal View Estates 2 is the insert.
Okay. New developments in that area.
Okay. It just seems strange to me that you wouldn't put it further out. If the power is going to be provided further out up Lake, why not put the substation further out?
If we're talking about just the circuits, I believe what our plan was some of those was to try to work them down to Highway 150 with development. Okay. Bring the power down there with the development to serve down. Once we get to Highway 150, we can go a lot of different directions.
Okay. One other comment, sir. in the last 17 years, there's been 4 deaths under the Henderson Terrace power lines, one of which was my wife.
Our
And I
condolences.
do not say that it had anything to do with it. No.
Yes, and I know there's another person, but we'll go ahead and hand the mic over here.
Just really quickly, Portia Pauley, 727 Golf Course Drive. Our daughter and her family are right in between the two sites, up off Boyd on Henderson. I would just like to reiterate to all of you what Mr. Gibbs said, because I think it's very important for the future that you think about, and you talk to the Chelan Planning Commission to think about, before any more of these huge developments are approved. You need to think about the infrastructure, where you're going to put it, how it's going to impact people who live here full time, and really be serious about it. And if these people are coming in and putting in these big developments, why can't they absorb some of the cost? Why can't their property absorb a substation, such as the end of Legacy, which is way out there? Why are those things not looked at? Why are all of these things approved before infrastructure is even put into place?
So you're just asking that for future consideration. You're not looking for a response right now. Great.
I think you need to think about it. You need to talk to the Chelan Planning Commission, who seems to, I understand, loving the money in your pocket for all the permits, but you need to think about the quality of life of those of us who choose to live here, raise our families here, hope our children move back here to raise their families, and what you're doing to the quality of the life of people who live here.
Thank you. There was a couple other people who would, yes, sir. Come on up to the mic, please. And again, I'm going to ask you, if you're on the map here.
Carl Glossinger, 490 Boyd Road. I'm right close to the Gibbs and between the two sites under consideration.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to say some things that others have maybe said in other words. When I used to lead, when I would encourage my team to go from here to there, when they didn't necessarily want to, I'd call it a difficult trip to a very nice place. So it's worth the effort. This is not that. This is a difficult trip to an unpleasant place. And that's what has all of these concerned citizens, I think, including myself, feeling kind of lousy about this. I'm curious, among the concerned citizens here, how many here are from, like, the Lookout? Raise your hand. Yeah, so it's kind of rhetorical, but the reason, do you live in Lookout?
I live in Leavenworth.
Oh, okay, well, you paused. It's because they're not concerned. They're not concerned because they already have their power underground. And they have no worry about a substation or lines being draped through their view. Yet, they're part of the incremental demand. I've said to the commissioners before, because I've been to a lot of these meetings, that I don't like this idea of let's try to get somebody to sell property to us. And I guess it worked in Leavenworth, because that's what you said to me at the time. But what if nobody wanted to sell? What if there was no Hellier, there was no Henderson, there was no nobody? What would you do? You wouldn't just wait. You have to find the best place and mitigate as much damage as possible to the community to meet the demand. And I think what we all feel bad about for each other, kind of the love of the community, is that we're having to make concessions for future demand that ain't us. It just doesn't feel very good. And so here we are, and we're a bunch of unhappy people, and the people who are driving the demand could care less because they didn't offer up property. We're here because Hellier and Henderson offered up property. That's why we're here. And that's unfortunate, I think. Thanks.
Thank you. I saw some other, Mr. Dreyer, there's another gentleman over here. We'll continue with some others first. Come on, sir, you can come on up.
I'm up on Pinnacle here with, in the middle of everything.
But we still need name and address too, please.
Dave Reel, 202 Pinnacle Place. And from what I'm gathering at this meeting, I haven't been involved over the last months of coming to these meetings, but just in tonight, it seems to me in terms of the visual effect of the substation itself, the Hilliard property, even one of the neighbors said they wouldn't even see it. They'd be more concerned about the power lines coming down the street. So given that, if it was the Hilliard place and the power lines went underground, I think those neighbors would even be satisfied with that. And I would have to ask you, with the power lines above ground, how much did it cost to replace from the fires about 5 miles of telephone lines down the lake this last year during the fires? What's the cost of replacing all that from the fire?
Well, you'd like an answer right now at this point.
Do you guys, you must know from your cost.
$2.5 million.
Okay, so if it was underground, would you be replacing that? Or would we be saving money because that was all underground and the fire would not disrupt all that?
Our assessment of that is it would have not saved us a substantial amount of money. Largely, the infrastructure was 1950 poles. They were close to replacement. That's not to say that it wasn't impactful, but our assessment of the situation and of the damage to fires and wind and storms is that it's a wash.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Dreyer. I'll give you your 3 minutes though at this time around.
Hey, thank you very much. So the one person said he is represented by the Chelan Homeowners Association. He's absolutely right. We did not send out a poll and ask each and every person. The Homeowners Association, the Board of Trustees, is responsible for a variety of things in terms of that. When we get input from homeowners, essentially we've got a lot of input from a lot of homeowners. We have to, as a board, take positions, even if it's one homeowner. And so you're right. We didn't ask you to vote, but at the same time, we are responsible for representing all of those homeowners. There are 3 new homes going up right there, and their only view is not the lake. It's right at that Henderson site. The reason I ask, so I could be really clear on giving us some more time to talk about some mitigations, one of the things that I've done in my past is look at grants. I've worked with the federal government, the state, cities, and councils. We had a $52 million grant from when I worked at Boeing to help dislocated workers. We can work with the Department of Ecology and others to find grant money to start the process of putting undergrounds. That doesn't mean we have to put the burden on all of you to try to make hard decisions or put the burden on those. There are ways of getting money to help us do things, but we need some time to do it. I'm willing to commit, and I know quite a few people who work in the business of getting grants from the government. We could get a grant for this. We can make this work, but we're going to need a little time to do that. And so that's one of the reasons I'm asking you respectfully to consider moving this time frame out and taking a hard look. Is that the 1 minute button?
It was pretty darn close.
It was pretty close. That was really good. You did it without pushing things there. So, okay, so in summary, thank you. I will wish that you take that under consideration, stop with a bell. And, but I think we can do it. There's a lot of talent out there. There's a lot of talent in this room. You've heard some of these people talk about their backgrounds and histories. I'm going to talk about mine. I'm just like Corky talked about. I started with nothing, and I did fairly well. And now I've got a home that I really want to enjoy and spend the rest of my life with, my wife and I there, and we're faced with this situation. I know we can make it work if you give us the time to do it, and the staff here to help do that. We can mitigate the cost and make this work. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Did I make my, 20 seconds?
Oh, no.
Thank you for the time.
I don't have a timeout one yet. That bell is just people leaving, so as people leave, you will be interrupted a little bit with that going on and off. We can't do anything about it. So another comment, I have a gentleman up here. You want to come on up, please? Oh, this will be good. He just did this to get up and make comments so he could stretch.
Everybody stretch.
Yeah. And after your name and address, well, let me know where you are. Here,
William Wren. I go as Bill. 147 Crest Drive.
Thank you, Tika.
Tika knows it well.
I write these addresses all the time. So, Bill, you're right in here, right?
No.
Oh, sorry.
But you're in that general area. That's all we really need to know.
I'm directly across the street from the original Henderson Site.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And I was part of the neighborhood concern group for that one. And that study came to a conclusion when Mr. Reich committed that it would be off the table for the substation. And I don't know if that comment carried out to any other PUD facilities. But then the process turned from non-transparent to totally transparent. But I heard tonight that you have an option to buy that site. And I wasn't aware of that at all until I sat there in that room. So I guess my question, that kind of violated the transparency a little bit for me. And my question is to the commission. Do you back up what Mr. Wright committed to, that that site would not be used? Thank you.
We absolutely back up that it will not be used. Oh, I'm Randy Smith, president of the board.
Do we have some more comments? We are happy to stay here, and if you want to ask questions afterwards, we'll still be here. So, seeing there are no other public comments, I think Steve wants to have some other final comments.
So, first of all, I want to thank everybody for being here. There were two questions that came up tonight there are clear answers to, so I'd like to answer those two. First of all, a question came up a couple of times about what can we do about thinking about growth in the future, and can we work with the county and other entities to try to do more in terms of planning for growth. So the board has already directed us to sit down with the other planning agencies for the cities in the county and the county, and that has already begun. So I just wanted to let you know that that message has already been heard and is already being implemented. Second thing is the question came up about what happens to the existing transmission line. So the plan at this point is that existing transmission line does not move. Another reason for undergrounding the distribution lines is actually put more distribution lines underneath that transmission line. It creates issues with respect to whether the transmission line would need to move or not. So the transmission line does not move. With that, so I'm a relative newcomer here to the county, about 4 years now, and I just have to tell you how impressed I am with the way folks engage, and really a difficult issue. And I know it's hard, and it's hard, honestly, to hear about the impact on people. But the civil and respectful way that all the way throughout this process people have engaged is really sincerely appreciated. So thank you very, very much for what you've done. I appreciate all of your willingness to sit through this whole process. And from here, we will continue to engage with you. We have your email addresses. We commit that we will stay engaged with you and let you know about what next steps are. So with that, we're done.